tool at our disposal. Constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis joins us now. Jenna, welcome. You know, the ACLU has just filed a suit. How does this all play out? Does it get stuck in the courts? If so, for how long?
Yeah, well, this shouldn't get stuck in the courts, and if anyone on the judicial panel anywhere is looking at the Constitution, they're looking at the National Emergencies Act, then they will see that the president used his discretionary power that was provided by Congress to declare a national emergency. We haven't seen this kind of controversy and just political rhetoric over a declaration of national emergency really ever. And so this just comes down to political gamesmanship and frankly should go directly to the Supreme Court so that hopefully the originalist majority on the Supreme Court can say once and for all, we need to protect our border, and that's well within the scope of the president's authority.
Hi, Jenna. It's Heather Zumaraga. The federal law does not define exactly what an emergency is. The first national emergency issued in 1917 under President Wilson to prevent the transfer of U.S. ships to foreigners during World War II. So do you think this should have been issued, this type of congressional power, in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. And if Congress thinks that they have extended national emergency power too broadly to the executive branch, then they certainly can go back in and change that law. But the Supreme Court also said in 1981 that Congress can't delegate a broad authority and then specifically veto an action by the executive branch that's vested with that authority simply when they disagree on policy. So Congress would have to go back and change the law in order to narrow this. And that may be a good idea.
Jenna, this is Gary Smith. Two questions. There's, I believe, 31 national emergencies existing, even some from the Carter administration that can go on in perpetuity. But it looks like to me 30 or 31 of them all relate to terrorist activities. Don't sell ships to North Korea, that kind of thing. So my first question is, what umbrella do you think this will fall under, if any, if he needs an umbrella? And second of all, maybe more importantly, you said this should go to the Supreme Court. However, practically, what do you see the legal path this will follow, and how long do you think it'll be tied up in the courts?
Sure. So as to your first question, the umbrella really is the National Securities Act. And while we see examples of terrorism being used, we also see other examples like President Reagan closing the border. We see other examples like 9/11 with President George W. Bush declaring a national emergency. So there are a lot of instances that fall under this very broad discretion. And so simply to say that border security doesn't fall within that very general purview isn't realistic, and that's not a great legal definition. And as to your second question, it really depends on where this is forum shopped. And so we're seeing, I think that President Trump is right. We're going to see several lawsuits in the Ninth Circuit, and those will likely be adverse to the president and so have to make their way up to the panel. And so the Department of Justice would be very wise in simply seeking a petition directly to the Supreme Court to address this very quickly and cleanly.
Jenna, if I might, this is Adam Lashinsky with Fortune in San Francisco. I'm not a constitutional law expert the way you are, but it seems relatively clear to me that this is a matter that was legislated carefully over the past several weeks. And so Congress not only has looked at this, but they've looked at it clearly, and they spoke, and they passed legislation that the president has signed. So it seems unusual to me that the president would have good constitutional standing for a matter where the Congress has legislated. There's no question that they've legislated, and they didn't legislate the wall.
Well, they did legislate in 1976 with the National Security, or the National
No, I understand that. That's not the question I'm asking, though. They've said, you know, we have a question about the wall. We've legislated on it. The answer is no.
Well, so these aren't mutually exclusive alternatives. So
okay, I understand that. That's a good point.
Yes.
So, Jonas Ferris, Jenna, here's the part. Okay, we actually talked about it on this show a few weeks ago about taking money from like the nuclear submarine budget and put it into thing. And conceptually, I think it's a good idea. But again, legally and precedent setting, here's my legal question for you. Let's say this all goes through. Like, what's to stop? Like, I always think now, like, what would AOC do? Like, can't they have a national emergency in like 8, 12, 16 years that's like global warming, that's a national emergency. We're going to move money from this into this. Like, what's to make high-speed rail? Like, how do we stop that if this goes through?
Well, we need to all be genuine conservatives. That's the answer, and conserve our rule of law, which gives limited specific authority to the federal government, and to make sure that we aren't going overbroad with this. And right now, the National Securities Act, while it was designed to narrow the president's authority with a declaration, it doesn't provide really a great definition. And so I think this is one instance that Congress should go back and really carefully consider.
But Jenna, aren't you with that answer? Aren't you agreeing with what I asked you a moment ago, which is it really isn't unclear at all. Congress has been very clear to the president, and that's kind of the guidance that the Constitution is looking for. Where Congress is clear on a funding issue, there's no question. That's how it's resolved.
Not at all, because these aren't mutually exclusive alternatives. President Trump has said, okay, there's about $1.5 billion for the wall, but in order to have border protection, he was very clear about his care and love for American military soldiers, and the fact that a wall...
You're changing the subject. You either need to talk about the Constitution or not talk about the Constitution.
But the Constitution provides that Congress can legislate on these types of issues, and they have issued in 1976 the National Emergencies Act. There is nothing in that act that would say that these two, signing this bill as well as declaring a national emergency act, and let me remind you that the president has declared the national emergency under current law before he is signing the new bill. So ex post facto in the Constitution would dictate this national emergency was declared under previous law, not the new bill.
He could legally do it, Jenna, and it will likely backfire, and it will likely get held up in the court. So he's asking, and we were just showing a full screen of the breakdown, ways he can get the money and where he can get the $8 billion that he asks for. Is there any amount of this $8 billion, and let's face it, he's probably going to really try to get half of that $8 billion. Is there any way he can get any of this money easily without having a legal challenge?
Well, that would have been if Congress would have been able to provide it and everyone agreed. That would have been the simplest measure, and I think that was the original goal. So because Congress is only providing some of it, now there are some unsecured appropriations that's within some of the defense spending and other places that he's able to get the rest of the funding for border security. And again, that's under the purview currently of the executive branch of the chief executive officer of the United States. And so where he's getting this money, it's absolutely constitutional. And if we want to change these types of acts, then we need to make sure to go to our congressmen and women and say, take a look at this for future AOCs or some of the others that may come and try to declare other wide-ranging national emergencies that we as the American voters wouldn't agree with.
Jenna, going off Gary's point, going back where they're mostly terrorist related, even going back further before they cleaned this up when like FDR was doing like you can't hold gold as an emergency, like has there ever been one where money was really reallocated from one area to another? I know there's been a lot of these. The Iran one's still in effect since the Carter administration, but has there been one that actually is like, we're taking money here and we're going to put it here?
Well, the Supreme Court, interestingly, has never overturned or vacated a national emergency. And so this is where we need to actually look back and see what has our government been doing? Are these things that we need to maybe elect some people who will go back through and either repeal some of this or, just narrow it down? There are a lot of things that the Trump administration, I think, has wisely brought up where we can see that our government historically has completely overreached and has been, and not overreached in a matter of the Constitution, but overreached in the sense they're doing things that maybe we, the American people, disagree with, and our money could be used elsewhere. Like, for example, a wall and border security.
Jenna, how do you think this is going to play out? Look into your crystal ball and tell us all what you see as the resolution.
I think this is going to come down to Chief Justice John Roberts, and that's really going to be the deciding vote to see whether his personal animus against President Trump is going to dictate the outcome of this case at the Supreme Court.
Come on, it's not a personal animus if Chief Justice Roberts says that Congress has spoken very clearly on its thoughts on the border wall, which is to allocate $1.7 billion on fencing. I find it hard to how you as a lawyer could conclude that that would be a personal matter between Chief Justice Roberts and President Trump.
If he was genuinely looking and calling fairly and applying the Constitution, then this is an outcome absolutely 100% in President Trump's corner. So anything else would be the result of activism.
All right, this battle is going to go on for quite some time. Jenna, Ellis, thank you so much for coming on and taking all those questions from us.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
In the meantime, we do have good news, absolutely, on the market. The Dow soaring more than